Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little stickier than usual. Your shoes squelch against the muddy cobblestones of a medieval street fair, and the air is thick with the scent of frying oil, roasted nuts, and something that vaguely smells like wet goat. Children shriek in the distance, men argue over dice games, and somewhere behind you, a minstrel is absolutely butchering a love song on a lute. Welcome to the wild, fragrant chaos of the medieval marketplace, where everyone's hungry, everything's slightly suspect, and yes, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're settling in, post your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we all meet to wind down. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a rough spun tunic and your hands are already sticky with some kind of honey glaze. Someone thrust it at you a minute ago, probably a fritter, and you ate it without asking what it was. That's kind of how things work here. In the center of town, under striped canvas awnings, sellers line the square, waving snacks in the air and yelling over each other like auctioneers. A short, bearded man with only 3 teeth promises his candied hazelnuts will cure your melancholy, while a woman offers blessed bread knots for half a penny. You pass a stall selling frictilli, deep-fried dough ribbons, twisted into knots and drenched in honey. They sparkle with a dusting of crushed almonds and, if you're lucky, a hint of cinnamon. Historians still argue whether these were only eaten during Lent, or if people just said that to sound virtuous. Either way, it's not Lent now and no one's pretending. A child brushes past you, cheeks bulging with what looks like a flattened date cake, and you catch a whiff of rosewater. Yes, rosewater, because even junk food can be fancy when sugar is still imported from faraway lands and costs more than a new goat. Sugar, by the way, is still sometimes sold by the apothecary, because technically it's medicinal. Got a headache? Try this peppermint sugar stick. Swollen gums? Maybe a syrup of violets and sugar will do the trick. Feeling sad? Candy. At one cart, a vendor sells what he calls poor man's joy, a kind of chewy barley candy stretched into glossy strands and wrapped around a twig. It's slightly burnt, slightly bitter, and probably picked up a few flies during display, but it sticks to your teeth like a promise you can't undo. A loud pop cracks nearby, and you turn to see a cook with a makeshift fryer. Basically a blackened pot of bubbling lard over a wood fire. He drops blobs of batter into the fat with a flourish, then pulls them out when they're golden and puffed. Fried milk curds, he says, jabbing one at you on a splintered stick. Still warm. It tastes like sweet cheese, if sweet cheese were dunked in oil and served with a prayer. You edge toward the booth selling dried fruits, figs, raisins, and something he calls Persian Delight, which may or may not be actual dates. The sign boasts "No worms today" in rough paint, which is not as reassuring as intended. There's a woman next door offering candied ginger and sugar roses, tiny sculptures molded from boiled sugar and tinted pink with beetroot. She lets you smell one before you buy. It's surprisingly fragrant and somehow less sticky than your current hand situation. You buy one, eat it in 3 bites, and nearly chip a molar. Worth it. A little side alley is crowded with children, huddled around a boy holding what appears to be roasted chestnuts, but they smell faintly odd. You ask, and he grins. Mice, he says. Dipped in wine and grilled. Want one? You back away, bumping into a cart selling tarts filled with something purple. You don't ask questions anymore. You're learning. Not all is sweetness and joy, though. A beggar nearby is chewing on a crust so hard it looks fossilized. A few stalls down, a woman is hawking leftover festival pies, made 2 weeks ago probably, but wrapped in new pastry to hide the smell. They're cheap and someone's buying them. There's a man singing rhymes about his candied apples, offering 1 free lick to passing girls. His apples are bright, glistening red, but you overhear someone whisper that he coats them in pig fat to make the candy shine. Again, do not ask questions. Back near the center, a brawl breaks out between two vendors arguing over territory. One of them throws a pie. It splatters on the cobblestones and a dog instantly lunges for it. Everyone laughs. The market smells like sugar and sweat and smoke, and your feet are starting to stick with every step. Mainstream fact? Here it is. Fried and sweetened street food was very real in medieval Europe, especially in bigger towns during festivals and feast days. Fritters, honey, cakes, and fruit-stuffed pastries were sold from carts or by peddlers, and people went wild for them. Fringe tidbit? Some sellers actually dyed their candies with beetroot juice or saffron to make them look richer, because appearance mattered. A bright pink sugar treat sold faster than a dull one, even if they tasted the same. And here's your scholarly mystery. Historians still argue whether medieval food vendors followed set recipes or just freestyled based on available scraps and seasonings. Some argue there were local guild-approved recipes for sweets, while others believe vendors made up dishes on the spot and just hoped no one got sick. Someone hands you a cone made of folded parchment, filled with roasted chickpeas and drizzled in vinegar and herbs. You pop one in your mouth. Crunchy, sour, weirdly addictive. A reminder, this is a time before preservatives, so everything must be eaten fast or masked with spice, smoke, sugar, or salt. Junk food is survival food, and a way to feel something when your life expectancy is 38 and your dentist is a blacksmith. The sun begins to dip behind the crooked rooftops, and the market's shouting dims into background chatter. You pass a man baking wafer-thin cookies over hot iron, imprinting patterns onto each with ornate stamps. He winks and flips one onto your palm. It's still warm. It tastes like sugar, ash, and flour, with just a trace of mystery spice. You walk on, brushing crumbs off your tunic, stomach pleasantly full, hands forever sticky. The market fades behind you as the noise drifts upward into the night sky. You survived your first round of medieval junk food. Sort of. You head away from the chaos of the market, following the smell of something richer, heavier, almost holy. Stone walls rise around you now. You're inside a monastery courtyard, cloistered off from the muddy streets, and for a second you think, peace. But then, you hear it. That unmistakable hiss of something frying in oil. You round the corner and there they are. Monks in long brown robes, cheerfully engaged in a full-blown pastry operation. This is no ascetic fasting ritual. This is a sugar-fueled fry-up. The smell? Sweet batter, bubbling honey, and something spiced with cloves. One monk drops a spoonful of dough into a blackened pan. Another dunks the finished balls into thick syrup and lays them on a wooden slab dusted with anise seeds. They call them pignolata, or sometimes spongata, depending on the region and the mood. Either way, it's delicious. Isn't this supposed to be a place of poverty? You ask a passing brother, who merely grins and offers you a fresh, steaming fritter. It crunches slightly at the edge, soft inside, and the honey clings to your lips like a second mouth. You've had worse confessions. It turns out monasteries had a strange relationship with indulgence. While publicly devoted to modesty, monks often found inventive loopholes in fasting rules. No meat? Fine. But fried dough, fruit pies, and anything smothered in honey? Not technically banned. And if the kitchen's offerings happen to taste divine, well, who's going to argue with God's own bakers? You peek into the monastery's cellar and discover sacks of sugar, labeled saccharum, carefully stored like medicine. It was often locked up or doled out in tiny amounts. Sugar wasn't just a treat, it was alchemy. It could preserve fruit, disguise spoiled meat, and conveniently make life's bitter truths more palatable. Literally. In a stone oven room, two young novices are scraping burnt bits from a pan. The abbot says we can't waste, one mutters, so we roll the scorched ones in nuts and call them black pearls. You try one, it tastes like regret and molasses. But it works. Mainstream historical fact? Monasteries were surprisingly innovative in cooking, especially sweets. They had access to spices and sugar thanks to trade routes, and used that privilege to bake for guests, festivals, or just their own indulgence. They helped preserve culinary knowledge through the centuries. But here's your fringe tidbit. In some records, monks experimented with infusing their sweets with herbs used in medicine, like lavender for sleep or fennel for digestion, essentially creating functional pastries centuries before TikTok wellness trends. As for open debates, historians still argue whether monasteries truly embraced gluttony behind closed doors or whether surviving documents only reflect festival times. Some say the luxurious menus were rare exceptions. Others believe monks lived double lives. Pious by day, pastry chefs by night. You find a parchment with a faded recipe, rose petal preserves layered between fried oatcakes meant for visiting nobles. Another note nearby says, "Remember, fast with the mouth, not the heart." That tracks. Outside in the garden, you nibble a small honey biscuit stamped with the monastery's seal. It's dry, crumbly, but rich with spice. Nearby, a monk stirs a pot of pear slices in wine, thickening into syrup. This one, he explains, is for the sick and the weary. He doesn't specify which you are, so you get a second helping. He tells you about kitchen Latin, a secret shorthand among monk cooks to hide their culinary shortcuts and recipes. Mix thoroughly really meant fold in old scraps. Rest dough in a cool place might mean leave it near the dog and hope for the best. Medieval cookery was part science, part survival, part accidental crime scene. Then as night falls, the kitchen quiets. The frying stops. The smells linger, warm and ghostly. You realize you've eaten enough fried honey balls to qualify for canonization, or a minor sugar coma. Before you go, a monk hands you a parting gift wrapped in cloth, a hard, disc-shaped candy etched with tiny symbols. "It'll keep in your pocket for months," he says, "possibly longer than you'll live." Charming. You step back out through the cloister gate, full of sugar, spices, and suspicious virtue. Behind you, the monks begin evening prayers. Their voices rise like incense, and for a moment you're lulled by the sound. Then a friar clatters again. One last fritter, you think. You leave behind the fried reverence of the monastery and head toward the sound of distant bells and barking dogs. The road gets busier. Dust kicks up around your ankles as you near the outskirts of a cathedral, its towering spire stabbing at the sky like a divine accusation. But your eyes aren't drawn upward. They're focused on the small army of pie vendors swarming the steps. It's Sunday. The town's poured out of church and everyone's hungry. That means one thing: meat pies. Glorious, greasy, slightly questionable meat pies. They come in all shapes: half-moons, coffins, hand-sized domes, and none of them are labeled. One might be pork, another eel, a third possibly pigeon, squirrel, or leftovers from Thursday. You pick one with a buttery crust, steam curling from a crack along the top. You take a bite. Immediately, your mouth is full of pepper, onions, and something chewy that could be chicken. Could be not chicken, but it's warm and salty and soaked in gravy, and in this moment, it's the best thing you've ever tasted. Vendors shout over each other, slinging pies from wooden trays like playing cards. A teen girl sells hers 2 for a penny and brags loudly, "Mine don't kill as often," which you find both reassuring and not. One old man has a pie balanced on a spatula, jiggling as he tries to get your attention. "Made it myself," he says. "No cats this time." You smile awkwardly and back away. A stray dog darts between legs, snatching dropped crusts. A child throws a half-eaten pastry into the street. Another snatches it up and runs. No one bats an eye. These pies are portable, cheap, and dense. That's the point. The crusts, called coffins, are sometimes too hard to eat, more like edible packaging. In fact, wealthy folks often ate the filling and gave the shell to servants or beggars. Waste not, want not, even when it's been under someone else's spoon. Mainstream fact: meat pies were a staple of medieval street food, especially outside cathedrals, churches, and fairs. They were filled with anything on hand: meats, vegetables, even sweet ingredients, and heavily spiced to mask any spoilage. Fringe tidbit: some enterprising pie sellers reused fillings from uneaten pies, mixing them into fresh dough and baking new batches. And if they were short on meat, well, there were plenty of birds and stray animals. There's even a rumor, totally unproven, that some vendors ground up old leather, soaked it in broth, and passed it off as mystery meat. Yum. And yes, historians still argue whether these pies were regulated at all. In some cities, there were supposed to be pie inspectors, actual officials who tasted and weighed pies to make sure they weren't full of lies and rot. But records suggest those inspectors were deeply underfunded, or easily bribed, or simply very full. You sit on a low stone step and watch a pie seller dunk a thick slice into a pot of gravy, hand it to a young couple with fingers already shiny with oil. They lean against each other, eating in silence. It's almost romantic. Near you, another vendor pours cheap ale into wooden cups and sells them for a few coins. You sip, and your tongue recoils. It's sour and flat, but it washes the pie down. Next to him, a woman sells hot hands, basically meatballs on a stick, wrapped in greasy cloth to keep them warm. You try one. The cloth might be cleaner than the meat, but it tastes like spiced heaven. There's music now. Someone with a bone pipe and a drummer banging rhythmically on an upturned bucket. It adds to the rhythm of the pies. Bake, slice, serve, repeat. Grease hits hot iron. Sizzling sings through the air. A loud shout. Someone's caught a pickpocket. A boy barely 10, stuffing a whole tart into his mouth as he's dragged away. The crowd murmurs, not in judgment, but in annoyance. He dropped the rest. You spot a cart with pies that seem different. The vendor says they're sweet meat pies, mutton mixed with dried fruit, honey, and almond paste. You bite into one and your eyebrows go on vacation. It's bizarrely good. Like someone tried to invent protein cake and accidentally made it work. This leads to a weird realization. Medieval folks didn't separate savory and sweet like we do. Everything was a little of both. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger showed up in meat dishes all the time. A pie might contain apples and beef. Sugar was a spice, not a dessert line. A friar nearby blesses a baby, then walks over and buys 3 pies, stuffing one into his mouth before the coins even change hands. He sees you looking and shrugs. Heaven has room for joy, he says, chewing loudly. At some point, you lose count of how many pies you've eaten. Your hands are shiny, your stomach protests. A small child offers you a mint leaf to clean your teeth. You thank her and pretend to use it. As the crowd thins, you notice the vendors packing up. Pies not sold are slid into cloth sacks or handed off to local dogs. A few go straight back into ovens for tomorrow's batch. One seller sprinkles fresh herbs onto his leftovers and says cheerfully, "Now they're breakfast pies." You believe him, you have to. Denial is easier when you're full. You push away from the cathedral steps, pie-logged and slightly unsteady, your fingers still greasy despite multiple attempts at wiping them on your tunic. You're starting to understand something deeply medieval. If it fits in your hand and makes you feel full for an hour, it counts as cuisine. The bell tower rings again. Pigeons scatter into the dusk. The last pie vendor offers you a tiny tartlet as a farewell gift. You pop it in your mouth without asking. It's jam? Meat? Who cares? You're past the point of questions now. Your stomach is a little too full, your hands are permanently slick, and your tunic now bears the battle stains of 3 separate pies. But the night isn't done with you. You wander down toward the docks where the air smells different. Brinier, sharper, like low tide mixed with spoiled vinegar and a dash of ambition. It's here, near the water, that the weirdest junk food comes out to play. On a narrow boardwalk lit by hanging oil lamps and fish guts, a row of crooked stalls beckons. These aren't the cheerful pie pushers or honeyball monks you met earlier. These are rougher folk, sailors, fishwives, and picklers with arms like firewood and smiles like secrets. The first cart you stop at is selling what looks like dried fish skins, curled, salted, and held together with thin twine. You pick one up. It crackles in your hand. "Snapper jerky," the man says. "Great for your teeth." You bite. It's like licking a salty leather boot. You smile, nod, and hand it back while pretending to chew. He doesn't notice. Next up, fermented turnips. A whole bucket of them, swimming in brine so cloudy it looks like swamp water. A woman ladles one out, slices it into quarters, and douses it with ground mustard seeds. You brace yourself. The flavor? Sharp, vinegary, slightly sweet, and weirdly fizzy. You cough. She laughs. That's the pickle waking up your soul. Somewhere nearby, someone shouts, "Fresh eel!" and you make the fatal error of looking. A vendor slaps a writhing eel onto a board, cleaves it in half, and tosses the head into a basket of others. "Want it raw or fire charred?" he asks. You opt for "not right now." But your curiosity is hooked. A few stalls down, someone's selling what they call eel surprise. It's wrapped in cabbage leaves, grilled over a low flame, and served with something red drizzled across the top. "What's the surprise?" you ask. The vendor grins. "Could be liver, could be heart, could be not eel." You nod politely. He hands you a skewer. You chew slowly. It tastes like every bad decision you've ever made. Mainstream fact of the hour: fish and pickled goods were absolutely common in medieval diets, especially in port towns and during religious fasts. Preserving with salt, vinegar, or smoke was essential, and fermented vegetables like sauerkraut or turnips often took the edge off a harsh winter pantry. Fringe tidbit: some medieval coastal towns had secret recipes for pickled jellyfish, sliced thin, doused in seawater and vinegar, and dried in the sun. Mostly a sailor's dare, but technically food. And of course, historians still argue whether these bizarre offerings were everyday meals or rare festival oddities. Some say fermented foods were peasant staples. Others think they were only consumed during shortages or when punishment was deserved. You reach a table lined with what looks like dried sausages. But there's something off. A strong scent of cloves and honey. "Fish sausage," the vendor says. "Cod and cinnamon." You blink. He nods. "For those who want meat flavor without meat sin." Ah, clever workaround for fasting days. A child nearby munches on something unrecognizable. A crispy ball covered in ash. "Herringbone," she says proudly. "Mama fries them in week-old lard." You take a tiny nibble. It crunches like gravel but tastes oddly complex. Fish, garlic, smoke, and shame. You spot a woman selling dried seaweed sheets soaked in brine and vinegar. She slaps one onto your palm. "Good for the blood," she says, and keeps you from turning pale in winter. It's chewy, rubbery, and makes your mouth taste like shipwreck. She seems proud of it. A man walks past with a tray of what look like small fish pies. Except instead of dough, they're wrapped in thin slices of dried radish. "Fast day dumplings," he says. "No flour, no sin." They fall apart the moment you bite in, spilling cold smoked herring and fennel seeds down your shirt. You're starting to understand why medieval people didn't wear white. Then comes the vinegar man. You hear him before you see him. Clinking bottles, singing about his magic sour cure. He's got jars of plums, onions, and garlic cloves steeped in thick black vinegar. One tiny sip of his concoction burns your throat and wakes your ancestors. "Good for digestion," he shouts. Maybe, or possibly burns right through it. But not all is terrifying. One stall, oddly clean and candlelit, offers little pots of what the woman calls gourd custard, made from mashed pumpkin, boiled with almond milk, honey, and a pinch of nutmeg. It's soft, warm, almost dessert-like. You eat it slowly, savoring a rare moment of culinary kindness. Someone nearby is slicing paper-thin pieces of smoked sturgeon onto coarse rye bread, then slathering it in beetroot mash. Another hand you a cup of warm broth with a pickled egg, floating in it like a lost ship. Then comes a true curveball: fried fish bones. A vendor grins as he drops them into hot lard. Crunches like twigs, he says. Tastes like fish. Feeds the poor. You crunch. It's oddly satisfying, like chewing history. Mainstream life back then wasn't all pies and pastries. This was the survival layer where spice masked decay and texture was a gamble. You could fill your belly with crispy skins and briny roots and still wonder if you'd eaten food or just ocean trash. You're sticky, fishy, and somehow still curious. You wipe your hands on your tunic for the 6th time, realizing it now smells like pickled onions and eel surprise. A dog follows you for 10 steps before giving up. You step away from the waterfront, leaving behind the chaotic symphony of sour, salty, and smoked. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs loudly. Someone else yells about the freshest gut string in town. It's time to go. You've survived the docks, just barely. And your digestive system may never trust you again. You've wandered through honey-drenched fritters, monk-made sugar bombs, and eel-flavored chaos. You deserve a break. But fate has other plans. Ahead of you, rising from the cobbled curve of the main road, is a grand stone estate. You can hear music, soft, lilting, the pluck of a harp, and smell something. Floral? You're about to trespass somewhere delicate. A noble feast is underway. You slip in with the rest of the help. Kitchen boys, seamstresses, and a stable lad holding a box of candied pears. No one notices you because no one looks up. Everyone is rushing. The kitchen is a battlefield of pastry crust, powdered sugar, and shouted Latin. A cook with a scar across his chin barks orders in 3 languages. This is where the fancy junk food lives. On the long oaken table beneath candelabras and silk runners sits a parade of sweets so elaborate they seem fictional. Marzipan sculptures shaped like swans, their beaks gilded with real gold leaf. Sugar-coated almonds dyed purple with elderberry juice. Jellies made of rose petals trembling like royal secrets. A noblewoman nearby daintily picks up what looks like a sugar cube, but it's stuffed with clove and saffron. Her mouth tightens. Too bold, she murmurs, then discards it into a golden bowl of rejects. You, meanwhile, have snagged something palm-sized and glistening. A fruit tart topped with candied orange peel. The crust flakes like snow. The filling is thick and floral, scented with what might be violets. It's strange. It's perfect. Mainstream fact? Sugar was status. In the medieval upper classes, showing off with exotic sweets, especially imported spices and bright dyes, was a big deal. If your marzipan sculpture could survive the dance floor, you were doing it right. Fringe tidbit: some nobles commissioned sugar models of castles, animals, or even their own faces, just to smash them dramatically at the end of a banquet. Think of it as medieval piñata energy, only stickier. And yes, historians still argue whether all nobles truly enjoyed these sweets, or just ate them to show off wealth. Some accounts suggest that many found them cloying, strange, or even medicinal, but refusing dessert was a political act. So they smiled, chewed, and swallowed gold if they had to. In the corner, a small group of children in velvet tunics is playing Feast or Famine, a game where they pretend to be beggars and toss sugar beads into each other's mouths. One of them is eating what looks like a tiny pie made of almond paste and lemon zest. Another holds a sugar quill, a feather dipped in syrup and hardened until crunchy. A footman brushes past you with a platter of gingerbread tiles, each carved with animals and flowers and glazed with honey. You snag one. The spices hit your tongue like a sermon. Cinnamon, clove, maybe a touch of black pepper. It's not just sweet, it's assertive. One serving girl whispers that some nobles request candied rose petals soaked in wine and crushed pearls. Pearls? You ask. She nods. Good for the skin, she says. You doubt it. But they sparkle in the light, so who's to argue? In the next room, there's a massive sugar fountain. Boiled sugar syrup poured into a delicate spiral sculpture that seems to melt as you watch. A boy licks a piece and instantly cries out. It's hot, he wails. Of course it is. It's literally molten. You retreat to the kitchen, which is somehow even more chaotic than the feast itself. Cooks with flour-covered faces toss trays back and forth. Someone is torching a sugar dome with a stick pulled straight from the hearth. A recipe pinned to the wall reads, Pines of Guillaunt. Pine nut candy, rolled in honey, set with silver foil. You blink. Giant pines? No, just an exaggeration. Everything here is. A baker slides a tray of sugar plums, actual dried plums stuffed with almond paste and rolled in crushed mint, into your hands. You eat 3 before realizing they were meant for the Duchess. Oops, well, too late now. A scribe sits in the corner painting little cards to accompany each dish. One reads, Sweet paste of paradise taken for melancholy and tooth despair. Apparently sugar was still being passed off as medicine, even here. Especially here. At some point, someone hands you a goblet of almond milk, thickened with rice flour and laced with rose water. It's creamy, floral, oddly refreshing. Also room temperature, which feels like a betrayal. By now, you're dizzy from the sugar, the perfume, the smoke. But you're not done. You see a platter being carried out to the high table, bearing a single stunning subtlety. A sculpted centerpiece made entirely from sugar and dyed pastry. This one is shaped like a knight kneeling before a sugar-coated lion. It's art. It's food. It's probably going to be eaten in exactly 4 chaotic seconds. You follow the platter out, just in time to hear the host bellow, Bring out the comfits. From a side door, a flurry of trays appears. Tiny spiced nuts coated in hard sugar shells, called dragues. They clatter into silver bowls like gemstones. Some are colored with saffron or beetroot, others dusted with fine gold powder. You grab a few, crunch. Sweet, spicy, medicinal. This was the ancient multivitamin. It's like biting into a peppermint that thinks it's royalty. Back in the hallway, the servants have started cleaning. A girl sweeps up a broken sugar peacock. A boy pockets 2 surviving almond tarts. A cat laps at a spill of honey near the stairwell. You slip out the servant's exit, your pockets lined with stolen gingerbread, and your teeth coated in something luxurious. You're not entirely sure how much of it was food and how much was theater. But you do know this. Rich people play with their snacks. You walk back into the cool night air, dizzy, sticky, and maybe slightly golden. You're back on the road now, breath fogging slightly in the night air, belly buzzing with noble sugar and dockside pickles. You don't know which part of your body feels more confused, your stomach or your soul. But before you can process the internal pastry war happening inside you, a shrill whistle cuts through the quiet. Then a drum beat. Then a squeaky, strangely ominous voice singing something about figs and sin. You've arrived at the edge of the fairgrounds and not the cheerful pigs on a spit side. This is the traveling peddler quarter. The stalls here are makeshift. Cloth sheets tied to sticks, hand-painted signs dangling precariously in the breeze, and a surprising number of animal skulls being used as decoration. It's less family-friendly market, more discount circus meets plague bazaar. And at the heart of it, candy. Lots of it. Some real, some questionably symbolic. You approach a wiry man with one eyebrow and no shoes who's shouting about boiled sugar miracles. He holds up a jar of what looks like melted amber. Basilisk syrup, he cries. Heals heartbreak, warts, and hunger alike. You ask what's in it. He winks and says, "Mostly honey. Some beetroot. Maybe basil. No actual lizards today." Comforting. Next to him, a child of indeterminate age is selling sticks dipped in what he calls fire toffee. Hardened sugar mixed with black pepper, ground ginger, and something else that makes your eyes water. You lick it and immediately regret every decision you've made since birth. Your tongue goes numb. Your lips tingle. The kid laughs like a goblin. A woman wrapped in bells and scarves pulls out a basket of candied cobwebs. Spun sugar shaped into thin, white threads, laid carefully over dried apple slices. You take one. It's light, crisp, oddly beautiful, and covered in cinnamon. Your nose twitches. Then comes the puppet show. You barely have time to react before a small stage creaks to life and two horrific felt puppets burst onto the scene. One is clearly a merchant, the other, a greedy monk. The plot: a slapstick battle over sugar cubes. Every punch ends in someone eating a sweet and shouting, "Witchcraft!" The crowd roars. You clap, confused and charmed. At the end, the puppeteer passes around sugar starch candies shaped like the characters. You eat the monk, he's lemony. Mainstream fact: traveling peddlers were a legitimate part of medieval food culture. They brought rare or regional treats from other towns, candied nuts, preserved fruits, and flavored syrups. They were loud, entertaining, and often exaggerated the health or magical benefits of their goods. Fringe tidbit: some peddlers made alchemy candies, little colored pellets claiming to give you visions, bravery, or fertility. Most were sugar mixed with herbs like rosemary or sage. A few probably included things that should not be ingested, like powdered pearl or bits of lead. And yep, historians still argue whether these sellers were seen as charming rogues or public nuisances. Some records praise them for spreading flavor and joy to rural towns. Others treat them like snake oil salesmen, tricksters peddling overpriced lies wrapped in honey. You buy a tiny bottle labeled Essence of Joy. It's just clove water with sugar, but you sip it anyway and pretend to feel wiser. One stall offers miracle stones, sugar lumps molded around fennel seeds and dried in sunlight. Another advertises spice tears, small drops of hardened syrup infused with pepper and vinegar. You try one and instantly tear up. The man cackles. Works, doesn't it? A woman offers you court candies, lozenges made of honey and lemon, pressed into intricate shapes. She swears they'll make you sing better. You test that theory by humming a few notes and decide she's at least partially right. You pass a man selling burnt sugar skulls. He insists they keep away nightmares. Especially if you eat them before sleep, he adds. You wonder how many medieval stomachaches were disguised as superstitions. At the far end of the lane, two performers juggle fire while shouting about sweet smoke powder. Turns out it's just roasted barley sugar mixed with dried mint, meant to be tossed into a flame for dramatic scent. You buy a pouch. When you throw a pinch onto a torch, it sparks and releases a smoky, sweet aroma. It smells like festival nights and bad decisions. You spot a cart that's drawing a crowd. Two young women are pulling stretched sugar into ribbons, twisting it into loops, and laying it over chopped walnuts. It's mesmerizing. Arabian taffy, one says. From the East. Probably not. But who's going to argue with something that sticky? You try a piece. It pulls at your molars like it has ambition. Sweet, nutty, and just a bit floral. Rosewater again. It's like medieval duct tape, but tastier. As the fair winds down, you find a man packing up his elixirs of delight, each bottle wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. He gives you one for free. For dreams, he says. Take a drop on your tongue before sleep. If you wake up laughing, it worked. You nod. You're definitely not drinking it, but you slip it into your pouch anyway. The lights dim. The performers vanish into the mist. The last puppet flops sadly onto a table. You chew the final bite of pepper taffy and rub your tongue with the corner of your sleeve. The peddlers move on. You do too. A little slower now, a little sugared out. The night is quiet again. You wake up curled beside a barrel, your cloak dusted with sugar, ash, and a few suspicious feathers. It's probably morning, or maybe just a particularly bright moon. Either way, your stomach groans like a distant storm cloud, and you're thirsty enough to chew moss. You're in the alley behind a bakery, and oh, you picked the right spot. The smell hits you first. Warm bread crust, bubbling cheese, something sweet and buttery rising with the dawn. Through a cracked wooden shutter, you spy the bakery's innards. A glowing brick oven, sacks of flour stacked to the rafters, and a crew of apprentices moving like frantic squirrels. This is ground zero for some of the most coveted street snacks in town. But you're not the only one who knows it. From the shadows emerges a kid, no older than 10, with soot-smudged cheeks and fingers fast as lightning. He slips through a loose board and reappears moments later holding a small, golden-brown bun. He tosses it to another boy waiting nearby, who wraps it in cloth and scampers off. You're watching a black market pastry operation in action. The kids work in pairs, one to snatch, one to sell. The goods? Leftover morning buns, cheese rolls, yesterday's honey cakes. Sometimes burnt, sometimes still warm. All of them resold to bleary-eyed travelers, hungover knights, or desperate apprentices with only half a coin to their name. You follow one of them through the back alleys, where he sets up a makeshift tray outside a tavern door. Within minutes, he's sold out. A grumpy man in chainmail pays 2 pennies for something called a roastman's delight, which turns out to be a fried turnip cake dipped in leftover meat drippings. Mainstream fact: pastry theft was so common in medieval towns that some bakeries hired night watchmen. And yes, many children did survive by stealing food and selling it back to customers. Sometimes at lower prices, sometimes with extra crumbs. Fringe tidbit: some kids even branded their black market buns with crude symbols to mark which gang sold them. A triangle scratched into the bottom meant still fresh. A line across the top meant contains meat. A double den? Don't ask. Historians still argue whether bakeries turned a blind eye to these thefts or actively fed the underground trade. Some masters may have allowed it, especially if it meant fewer scraps wasted and more locals loyal to their ovens. Back in the alley, another boy offers you a sugar lump special. It's basically hardened porridge rolled in powdered cinnamon and honey, then fried to disguise how old it is. You chew slowly. It's fine. Sweet enough. Crunchy in all the wrong ways. But filling. A girl named Liza shows you her trade kit. A wooden box lined with cloth, a handful of coin slugs, fake pennies, and a loop of twine to tie the buns together when transporting them. The trick, she says, is to sell them before they get cold. Or hard, or stolen back. She takes you to a nearby tavern called the Bent Boar, where early drinkers nurse their regrets with thick mugs of beer and something called dribble cakes. They're flat, fried rounds of dough, glazed with leftover syrup, and topped with chopped dates or occasionally dried peas. You try one. It lives up to the name. Your chin is instantly sticky. Outside, a gang of pastry kids runs past you, whooping. One of them throws a sausage roll like a baton. It arcs through the air and lands neatly in another kid's pouch. You clap. They don't notice. You spend the next hour sampling scrap cakes, baked from leftover dough, baker's bark, burnt crusts dipped in honey, and beer biscuits. Dry little rounds meant to be soaked in ale to become edible. They sell fast. At one point, you spot a girl selling candied breadcrumbs. Just that. Stale bread soaked in syrup and sun-dried into crunchy bits. They're oddly addictive. She calls them sweet grit. You hand her a copper. She hands you a fistful in a pouch that smells faintly of pickles. You don't ask. One boy has taken his trade up a notch. He opens a box filled with tiny pies, some savory, some sweet. But he won't tell you which is which. Luck pies, he grins. You try one. It's mashed peas and plum jam. You're not mad, you're just confused. Mainstream bakery law did exist. Cities like London had a size of bread laws to regulate loaf sizes, flour quality, and pricing. But enforcement was spotty, especially at dawn behind closed shutters. What mattered most was hunger and hustle. One old man, clearly drunk, buys 5 scrap buns and offers them to the tavern cat in exchange for blessing his dreams. The cat hisses. You take that as a no. Liza hands you a final treat, something she calls cinder cake. Burnt dough soaked in cheap ale, mashed with raisins, and rebaked until crunchy. Not for chewing, she warns, for gnawing. You gnaw. It takes time, but it grows on you. By mid-morning, the bakery's ovens go quiet. The alley kids melt away into the crowds, their pockets jingling with coin, or maybe buttons. You wander on, belly full of gray market pastries and the kind of sugar that probably came from 5 hands ago. And you think, in a world where bread is life, crumbs are currency. And stolen buns? Well, those are just opportunity baked fresh. The sun hangs higher now, draping gold across the uneven rooftops, and the town begins to buzz in that uniquely medieval way. Somewhere between midday hustle and complete structural collapse. The roads grow noisier, muddier, and louder as you drift toward the tavern district. The part of town where day drinking isn't frowned upon so much as encouraged with a generous heap of fried something. You arrive at a small square ringed with timber-framed buildings leaning in like gossips. Smoke wafts from open kitchen windows. A man in a cabbage-stained apron swings open the creaky door to the hollow flagon, yells something profane about goat stew, and disappears back inside. This is where the medieval munchies go full unhinged. The tavern interior is dim and warm, with wooden beams low enough to make you duck. Tables are stained with wine, ale, and, based on the smell, at least one chicken incident. The crowd is a glorious mix of workers, wanderers, and folks who haven't stood upright since last Tuesday. You slide onto a bench just as a server slams down a bowl of something fried and golden. Cheese curds, she grunts. Freshish. You poke one with your finger. It bounces slightly, good sign. You take a bite. The crunch is immediate, followed by the molten punch of sour cheese. It's been rolled in flour, dipped in egg, and fried in what might once have been lard. You chew carefully. It's addictive in the way that bad decisions always are. Next, a board appears covered in skewers, meat on sticks. Some are clearly pork or chicken. Others are harder to identify. A man across from you winks and says, "Guess right, and it's free." You chew a piece that tastes like lamb, but with notes of sadness and fur. Could be rabbit, could be regret. Mainstream fact? Tavern fare was hearty, greasy, and made to soak up ale. Fried or roasted meats, bread chunks, curdled cheeses, and thick sauces ruled the tables. You didn't come here for finesse. You came to not starve, and hopefully forget your debts for a while. Fringe tidbit? Some taverns were infamous for bizarre signature dishes like goose blister, goose fat fried with onions and gristle served on rye, or beef shadow, just broth, no meat. One London tavern supposedly served invisible pie as a joke, a crust filled with air. Surprisingly popular. And yes, historians still argue whether taverns were regulated for food hygiene or just left to their own microbial ecosystems. Some cities passed laws, but enforcement was iffy, especially after dark. Patrons knew the risks and ordered anyway. Your server plunks down another dish. Deep-fried leeks still sizzling, topped with something she calls crumbs of spice. It's basically yesterday's bread toasted, pounded with pepper and thyme. Delicious. Dangerous. You eat 3 before your tongue starts tingling. Nearby, a bard is half singing, half choking on what he swears is sweet beer, which turns out to be ale mixed with honey and mulled wine spices. You try a mug. It tastes like someone spiked your cough syrup with optimism. Someone else hands you a bowl of boiled barley slathered in bacon grease and sweet onion jam. Breakfast stew, she says. You're not sure which part of the day she thinks this is, but it warms your hands so you eat it. On a dare, you try something called whelp fritters. Essentially scraps of meat, hopefully not actual puppies, mashed with beans and dipped in batter. The cook assures you it's traditional. He also assures you it only causes mild hallucinations when fresh. Fantastic. A group of travelers nearby munches on a pudding board, an array of tiny boiled cakes made from sweet, dried fruit, and spiced breadcrumbs. Some are sweet, others savory. One tastes like cloves and lamb. Another strangely like mint and despair. You eat a drunken turnip, soaked in leftover wine and roasted until caramelized. It tastes like someone tried to reinvent candy using only bitterness and hope. You eat too. Back behind the bar, the tavern's cook flips a pan of bramble mash, berries, oats, and beer boiled into a sticky paste and fried into lumpy cakes. He plates them with what looks like soft cheese. You take a bite. Sweet, sharp, weirdly comforting. Like being hugged by someone wearing an onion necklace. Then comes the most feared snack of all, the tavern egg. It arrives unannounced, balanced on a tiny wooden cup, wobbling with barely contained menace. The server simply says, "One bite." You do it. Because you're brave or foolish. The egg is soft-boiled, then rolled in barley ash and fried in tallow. The inside is somehow both runny and dry. The flavor? Smoky, funky, bold, like licking the inside of a chimney. You chase it with sweet beer and stare into the void for a bit. Mainstream tavern snacks weren't meant to delight. They were meant to fill you up, keep you drinking, and maybe help you forget how damp your boots were. Fried cheese, spiced crumbs, boiled bread paste. It all went down easy enough after 3 mugs of warm ale. Someone at the end of the table bites into something and shouts, "Toad!" Everyone laughs. Apparently it's just sausage. Probably. A girl slides a plate towards you with a whisper. Try this. It's just bread, fried in goose fat, topped with mashed parsnip and sugared onion. It tastes like autumn and dental regret. You nod gratefully. The tavern dims as evening approaches. Lamps are lit. The smell of smoke and grease thickens. Someone starts singing again, worse than before. A cat jumps onto your table, steals your last cheese curd, and disappears like a thief in the night. You've eaten your way through every questionable snack this place offers. Your breath could peel paint. Your tunic now has more oil stains than fabric. You regret nothing. As you step out into the dusk, stomach heavy, face glowing, you realize something profound. Medieval taverns weren't just places to drink. They were where the art of drunk eating was born, and where your digestive system officially gave up trying to make sense of anything. The tavern's greasy glow fades behind you as the street grows thick with the scent of incense, roasting almonds and too many unwashed feet. The bells are ringing again, not for church but for celebration. You've stumbled into a feast day. And friend, medieval feast days are where food and chaos hook arms and dance barefoot in the mud. People spill into the square like honey from an upturned jar, loud, sticky, and slightly fermented. Flags flutter from windows. Children dash past with sweet rolls in both fists. Someone is juggling eggs. Another is clearly failing to juggle eggs. A priest in crimson robes is blessing a giant cake, while 2 boys steal figs from its backside. No one stops them. That's part of the fun. You're surrounded by the smell of almond cakes baking on hot stones. Some are shaped like animals, pigs, birds, or dragons, and dyed pink with beetroot, or yellow with saffron. Others are humble rounds, brushed with honey and pressed with stamps of saints' faces. You grab one, bite in, and nearly choke on a clove. It's sweet, peppery, and definitely not FDA approved. A woman near the church entrance hands you what she calls miracle bread. Thick slices dipped in sweet wine and roasted over coals until the crust caramelizes. She whispers that it's good luck if you eat it with your eyes closed. You try it. It burns your lip. Good luck indeed. Mainstream historical fact. Religious festivals were some of the biggest excuses for food blowouts in the medieval calendar. Even the poorest people would save up ingredients or beg for extra grain to cook something special. Almond cakes, sweet breads, and fruit pies were the heroes of the hour. Fringe tidbit. On some feast days, entire streets were lined with what were basically early buffet tables. Wooden boards piled with pastries, fried cheeses, nuts, and fruit pastes. The catch? No one cleaned them between uses. You just wiped your hands on your neighbor and kept chewing. And yes, historians still argue whether these massive food displays were actually common or just local to bigger towns. Some claim smaller villages celebrated with simple loaves and stew. Others believe even the tiniest hamlet found a way to fry something and call it holy. Back in the square, the blessing of the mead is happening. A monk swirls a jug, prays loudly, and promptly drops it. The crowd cheers. Everyone starts drinking. Mead is poured from barrels into wooden cups, ceramic mugs, and, once you see, a hollowed-out cabbage. Nearby, someone hands you a honey puff. It's fried dough dipped in mead syrup and rolled in crushed nuts. Your fingers stick together instantly. A child offers you a rag. It is already sticky. A troupe of dancers whirls by, flinging rose petals and powdered sugar. You get hit in the face with both. It's festive. It's itchy. Food vendors are working overtime. One woman flips oatcakes on a griddle while simultaneously selling tiny tarts filled with apple and mustard. You try one. It tastes like a fight between autumn and sinuses. You pass a group of men eating beer buns, thick rolls soaked in ale, grilled until crispy, and topped with a smear of pickled onions. They laugh too loud. One offers you a bite. You accept. Your breath now has its own agenda. Near the church, a pile of boiled sweets is being guarded by a child with a wooden sword. Pilgrim's Joy, he calls it. Honey drops with crushed fennel supposed to protect you from temptation. You pop one in your mouth and immediately want more temptation. The crowd swells as evening falls. Torches are lit. Bread pudding is passed around in chipped bowls. Some are drizzled with syrup, others with confusion. One has raisins. One has something squishier. You don't ask. A man walks by with blessed buns, stamped with a bishop's seal and soaked in mulled wine. You follow him. You buy one. You chew carefully. Somewhere inside is a hidden clove pod that nearly takes your tooth. Blessings hurt. You find yourself at a table lined with festival fingers, long, thin strips of fried dough flavored with cinnamon and sugar, dusted with powdered pepper for an extra kick. You grab two. They crackle in your mouth like joy itself. You cry a little. A local tradition begins. The feast toss. Two bakers compete to throw loaves of sweet bread into the crowd. The goal, distance, accuracy, drama. One loaf nails a priest in the back. Everyone cheers. You catch a roll midair and eat it with zero shame. Mainstream feasting was messy, generous, and communal. People shared without thinking. You could leave with a full belly, sticky hair, and 3 unsolicited blessings. And that was before the fireworks. You see a vendor slicing what he calls holy cheese wheels, fried rounds of goat cheese dipped in lavender syrup. It smells absurdly floral. You try it. It tastes like a soap maker's last wish. But it's warm, gooey, and somehow comforting. A girl hands you a small pot of Saint's Delight. Crushed almonds, rose syrup, and stale breadcrumbs mashed together and frozen on a stick. You suck on it like a medieval popsicle. It melts too fast. You don't mind. There's music again. Dancing, fire spinners, a man balancing candied apples on his head while playing the recorder with his nose. You're not hallucinating. Probably. As the night winds down, the square is littered with crushed tarts, spilled mead, and people sleeping on benches. You You find a quiet corner, sip the last of your sweet beer, and finish off a pastry that may or may not contain plums. Your tunic is a patchwork of syrup stains. Your teeth ache, your soul is buzzing. Feast days weren't just for worship. They were for indulgence, forgiveness, and eating until you forgot the winter. And in that spirit, you take one last honey puff, stuff it into your mouth, and lean back against the wall with a sigh. You're full, you're sticky, you're victorious. You wake up on a wooden bench with your mouth glued shut from dried mead syrup, and a piece of pastry stuck to your forehead like some kind of medieval merit badge. Your stomach. Oh dear. Your stomach is making noises that sound like a choir of haunted toads. This is not a drill. Welcome to your medieval hangover. The feast day is over, but the damage lingers. Around you, the square looks like a battlefield of sweets and regrets. Crushed almonds. Empty mugs. A boy curled under a table holding a candied onion and muttering something about saints. A pig trots by with what might have once been a cake on its back. You blink twice. Yep, still real. A soft groan rises behind you. A monk with icing in his beard is trying to stand. He doesn't succeed. You manage to sit upright and realize two very important things. Your mouth tastes like smoked raisins. You're going to need some serious medieval hangover food to survive the next hour. You hobble toward a nearby bakery, not for sweets this time, but for something heartier. Something to soak up every decision you've made since that second goose blister. And, wouldn't you know it, there's a small crowd forming around a pot, already steaming in the alley. You peek inside. It's leek broth, hot, salty, slightly green. The cook stirs it like it owes him money. Best for the morning after, he grunts, ladling some into a wooden bowl and handing it your way. You sip. It's rough. Earthy. Sharp with garlic. But comforting, like a scolding hug. Mainstream fact. Medieval folks had their own version of hangover cures, often centered around warm broths, pungent herbs, and grounding carbs like barley bread or porridge. Leeks, onions, and garlic were favorites for waking up the blood. Fringe tidbit. Some people believed a fried egg laid on the chest, not eaten, just laid there, could draw out the humors of wine. Others swore by soaking their feet in cabbage water while chewing parsley. It was both science and art. Mostly not science. And yes, historians still argue whether these hangover foods were actually effective or just a form of edible punishment. Some recipes survive in medicinal texts, while others come from tavern lore passed down like sacred truth. Either way, people kept crawling back for them. You get handed a slab of coarse barley bread, toasted and drizzled with honey. It's dense, dry, absolutely necessary. You chew like your life depends on it. It might. Beside you, a man nurses what looks like a bowl of boiled oats with shredded apple and black pepper. Wakes up the belly, he says. It smells like morning and poor decisions. A girl stirs a pot of pottage, basically everything left from yesterday's stew mixed with more water, some carrots, and a questionable egg. You pass. She shrugs and eats it anyway. You try ale custard, a thick spiced pudding made from day-old ale milk and crushed nuts. It's strangely effective. You feel yourself slowly returning to the world of the living. Then someone hands you a roasted onion. No sauce. Just charred layers, a dash of salt, and a prayer. You bite in. Sweet. Software somehow healing. You nod silently. A wrinkled woman appears and begins handing out mugs of vinegar water mixed with honey. Cleanses the gut, she says. You take one. It tastes like punishment. You drink it anyway. Some hangover cures seem spiritual. A boy lights a twig of sage and waves it around your face. You're not sure if this is medicine or a prank. He drops a ball of fried cheese into your hand and runs. You're offered a fire bun, a bread roll stuffed with garlic, pepper, and mustard seeds. It's hot, like smoke coming out your ears, hot. But by the third bite, your headache retreats like a frightened bandit. Across the square, someone's frying parsnip pancakes. Thin, crisp, and served with a dollop of thick yogurt and chives. You get one. You eat it in 2 bites. Life improves. You overhear 2 men debating hangover methods. Boiled nettle tea, I swear by it. Raw egg and cider? You're both mad. Black pudding and a run. No one is running. They all have pudding. A kind baker offers you bread ends. Crusts soaked in sweet wine and baked again into crunchy bites. Leftovers for the soul, she calls them. You take a few. They work. Eventually, you find yourself leaning against a post with a warm cloth around your shoulders and a bowl of lentil porridge in your lap. It's thick, bland, and miraculous. Your brain stops spinning. Your heart stops dancing. You take one last bite and think, this is it. This is what survival tastes like. And then, because medieval people were nothing if not extra, someone walks up with a tray of hangover tarts. Real thing. Made from bread, onion, and mint, sweetened just enough to make you feel human. You cry. Quietly. And eat too. Mainstream cures always involved warmth, carbs, and herbs. Nothing cold, nothing raw. Everything soft, simmered, and made by someone who's probably judging you. By now, you've regained enough awareness to stand. You wipe your mouth, adjust your tunic, and breathe deeply. You lived. You did it. You feasted, you paid the price, and you emerge a little stickier, a little wiser, and still slightly full of clove. You take a final sip of leek broth, toss the bowl back to the cook, and nod in gratitude. He grunts. It's basically a hug. You walk away slowly, steadier, hungover but healing. The medieval hangover is not conquered, it is endured. And you, noble snack crusader, have endured it in full. You've barely shaken off the last shiver of your honey-soaked hangover when the mood of the street shifts. The buzz softens. The energy grows tighter. You notice more eyes watching from behind windows. More guards walking the street with their thumbs looped into their belts and their eyes squinting suspiciously at bread crusts. Why? Because you've stumbled into the part of town where snacks become illegal. Welcome to the world of medieval food laws and the weird snack crimes that try to dodge them. The smell of hot sugar still lingers in the air, but here it's less celebratory and more guilty. You round a corner and see a boy slip a sticky tart under his cloak like it's contraband. Which, in this case, it kind of is. Food, especially the good stuff, wasn't always yours to eat freely. Especially not if it looked too expensive for your social rank. Enter the sumptuary laws. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, there were real laws that dictated who could eat what. Sumptuary codes governed everything from clothing to table fare. You couldn't just eat imported cinnamon or French pastry if you were, say, a cobbler's apprentice. That was noble territory. Fringe tidbit? In some cities, street vendors actually developed camouflage foods. Cheap sweets made to look like expensive ones. Honey dyed to resemble saffron. Plain almond paste painted gold with egg yolk. There was even a knockoff marzipan called mockspan, made from mashed peas and lard. Don't ask. And yes, historians still argue whether these food laws were consistently enforced or mostly ignored. Some cities had regular patrols inspecting market stalls. Others turned a blind eye as long as no one choked on anything too luxurious. Food crimes were usually more about appearances than actual danger. You pause at a shadowy stall where a woman in a veil is selling apple coins. Thin, dried slices dusted with a blend she whispers is cinnamon. You ask if it's the real spice. She gives you a look and says, "Only if you squint." You buy some. Not far off, a man with ink-stained fingers offers forbidden tarts. They're filled with honeyed nuts and drizzled with something he claims is cinnamon syrup smuggled from Genoa. He winks. You look around. No guards. You take a bite. It's heavenly. Sticky, sweet, and just a little dangerous. The thrill adds flavor. A beggar nearby chews on a dry crust and watches you with envy. "Used to sell spice cake," he says, "before the guild shut me down. Said I weren't illicit, man." You hand him the rest of your tart. He grins with 4 teeth. In an alley, 2 kids huddle over a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside? Illicit. Cheese. Soft, smuggled from the monastery kitchens, molded into flower shapes to look decorative. "Say it's for feast day," one whispers. No one asks questions. You eat one. It's creamy, faintly herby, possibly illegal. You don't care. You wander into a bakery that's clearly skating the edge of legality. The smells are too rich, the bread too golden. A sign by the window reads, "No noble toppings without proof of title." You laugh, the baker doesn't. He slides you a bun from under the counter. "Apricot," he says. "Don't tell the magistrate." You eat it in 2 bites. Some stalls fight back against food laws with sarcasm. One sells pauper's pie in big letters, actually a very tasty mash of sweet peas, garlic, and crushed raisins. Another advertises illegally good gingerbread with a wink and a prayer. You pass a man selling what he calls heretical fritters. They're just honey-soaked dough fried in almond oil and dusted with crushed cloves. The name is a joke, but also not. He tells you the bishop once threatened to shut him down for encouraging gluttony. So now he leans in. One of the weirder booths is offering shadow sugar, a dusty gray powder meant to imitate powdered sugar, made from crushed eggshells and dried milk. You pass. Even medieval curiosity has limits. A guard strolls by. Every vendor freezes for a second. The man with the forbidden syrup coughs loudly and swaps his sign to "date jam." The cheese kids vanish like smoke. You stare at your hands, still holding the apricot bun. You take another bite, casually, like you've done nothing wrong in your life. The guard moves on. A woman with a baby strapped to her back offers you noble nuts. Spiced walnuts wrapped in silver foil. You look skeptical. She shrugs. Almonds with pepper. But if you tell them they're noble, they sell twice as fast. The ingenuity is endless. One boy hands you a lollipop made from honey, pressed into the shape of a cathedral window. "Piety on a stick," he says. "Exempt from taxes." You laugh. You buy 3. Mainstream snack crime wasn't about stealing. It was about pretending. Making cheap things look fancy. Swapping forbidden ingredients with acceptable ones. Turning food into theater. If you couldn't afford a noble's pantry, you acted like you could, with saffron-colored dough, spice-scented glazes, and enough nerve to sell it on a Sunday. You stop at a final stall where a man is roasting nuts over coals. He hands you a small cone of burnt sugar pearls. Not fancy, not illegal, just delicious. A moment of calm in the chaos of coded cuisine. He nods toward the market's edge. "Next town over, they jail you for rosewater," he says. "Here, just don't get caught." You walk off chewing slowly, the sweetness lingering in your teeth like a half-kept secret. Not all crimes are loud. Some come wrapped in dough and dusted in forbidden spice. And honestly, they taste better that way. You head east, weaving through crooked alleys until the buildings start to sag and everything smells faintly of vinegar and smoke. This is where food goes to die, or occasionally to rise again in glorious disguise. Welcome to the land of street confections and fake freshness, where apples sparkle with lies and every sweet has a backstory. You spot the first sign of trouble hanging from a cart like a badge of honor. Best apples in Christendom. The apples themselves, though, waxed to a shine, stacked in impossible pyramids, and a little too perfect. You pick one up and sniff. Vinegar. Definitely vinegar. The seller sees your expression and leans in. "Little trick of the trade," he whispers. "Soak 'em in sour wine and rub 'em with chalk dust." Brings out the blush. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs. People want their apples to look blessed. Who am I to disappoint? Mainstream fact? Medieval fruit sellers often faked ripeness by polishing apples with cloths, dipped in vinegar or rouge. Some even carved shallow lines into the skin and rubbed in ash or beet juice to create a just-picked illusion. Fringe tidbit? A few vendors supposedly used powdered brick to tint their apples red. Not exactly toxic, but definitely not FDA approved. Some even used wine lees, fermented grape gunk, as a glaze. And historians still argue whether this kind of fruit fraud was widespread or just a city trick. Some scholars believe it was a street-level hustle in larger trade hubs. Others think it was a standard part of the produce game, right down to the village market. You take a bite, it's soft, floury, vaguely fermented. Not great, but not awful. A little excitement for the immune system. As you chew, a boy walks past juggling something sticky on sticks. Sugar berries, he calls, though they're clearly just hawthorn pods dipped in thick syrup and rolled in dusted breadcrumbs. You try one. Crunchy, sweet, hollow in the middle, kind of like optimism. Down another alley, a woman sells Saint's Tears, clear sugar drops shaped like tiny pearls, strung on linen thread and worn like edible jewelry. Bite 'em during prayer, she says. Softens the words. You nod reverently and bite one. It sticks to your tooth like betrayal, but it tastes like lavender and lemon, and that counts for something. You pass a stand where old fruit is reborn as candy. Mushy pears mashed into paste, boiled with honey, and rolled into sticky parchment sheets. Pear paper, the vendor calls it. Travel snack, won't rot. You buy one. It's chewy, tart, slightly fibrous, a medieval fruit roll-up. At the far end of the row, a vendor stands beside a pot of bubbling syrup. Into it, he dips sticks of rye bread, dries them over smoke, and sells them as sweet branches. You break one in half and bite down. It's brittle, smoky, and oddly good. Like if toast and licorice had a secret meeting behind a monastery. Not far away, someone's selling angel chips, fried pastry shards drizzled with honey and dusted with black pepper. They crunch like parchment and melt into heat. You cough once, you eat 5. Suddenly, a shout. Rancid figs! Everyone freezes, but it's just a prank. A group of kids huddles in the corner with a basket of dried figs and a pouch of chalk. They're rubbing it onto the fruit to age them for fun. We sell 'em cheap, call it rustic, one explains. Folk eat it up. You try one. It's chalky, sweet, maybe haunted. You smile, then you reach the candied nut cart. This is the good stuff. Almonds roasted in honey, walnuts spiced with clove, even a bowl of candied chickpeas. Sweet, crunchy, and oddly satisfying. You try one handful, then 2. You don't stop until your jaw hurts. The seller points to a jar labeled Spiced Joy and explains it's made from crushed almonds, sugar, and rose water, packed into small balls and rolled in mint. For courtship, he adds, winking. Or apologies. You buy 3, just in case. You stroll past a woman selling preserved orange peels, cut into coins and soaked in syrup. She calls them sun buttons. You pop one in your mouth. Zingy, bitter, sweet. You immediately want 5 more. Nearby, a girl hands out cherry bark chews, literally strips of boiled bark soaked in syrup and dried flat. They're tough, sticky, and taste like the inside of a potion bottle. Not bad, honestly. Suddenly, a boy offers you what he calls a candy bundle. You unwrap it to find a mash of mashed dates, flour paste, and fig seed rolled in wine lees. It's sweet, gooey, and looks like something someone dared someone else to invent. A little further on, a woman with 1 eye and 14 rings is frying dough in a shallow dish over coals. She shapes it into tiny flowers, dunks it in sugar syrup, and dusts it with crushed thyme. Funeral cakes, she says casually. We eat 'em to keep the dead happy. You eat one and feel both alive and slightly haunted. And at the very end of the row is the most honest sign of the day. Old apples, new dreams. 3 for a coin, no questions. You buy 3, you ask nothing. Mainstream medieval street confections weren't pristine. They were scrappy, inventive. A little bit of miracle, a little bit of fraud. Sellers reused, remixed, and reimagined whatever fruit or flour they had, layering it with sugar, spice, and pure audacity. You munch one last sugar drop as the street begins to quiet. Vendors pack up. The vinegar apples glisten under the torchlight. Someone sweeps away the breadcrumbs of 100 lies. You walk off into the cooling dusk, a pouch full of sticky treats and a stomach full of suspicious sweetness. Sometimes the best bites are the ones you're not supposed to believe in. You follow the scent of something toasty and caramelized down a sloping side street, where the stones grow smoother and the houses lean a little closer together. It's quieter here, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet where secrets live in the shadows and the kitchens whisper behind thick oak doors. And oh, the kitchens here are alive tonight. You've stumbled into servant territory. Back stairs and low windows, narrow alleys slick with cooking grease and spilled wine. This is where the nobility's food doesn't just get made, it gets talked about. You peek around a corner and see 3 kitchen girls sitting in a tight circle, icing slabs of gingerbread with careful fingers. One holds a piping cone made from parchment. The others dip their tools in bowls of honey and cinnamon. They're laughing, softly at first, then louder. You hear one say, "Did you hear what the Lord's daughter did with the minstrel?" The icing slips. They all squeal. Welcome to the sweetheart of court gossip. The gingerbread smells heavenly. Clove, anise, black pepper, molasses. It's being shaped into tiles, pressed with woodblock patterns. Fleur-de-lis, saints, even little dragons. They're for a banquet, probably. Maybe a wedding, maybe just another excuse for the Lord to eat 10 desserts and pretend it's diplomacy. Mainstream fact. Gingerbread was hugely popular in medieval courts. Originally considered medicinal, it was a luxury sweet made with exotic spices, shaped into patterns, and gifted at feasts or festivals. It could be soft or crunchy, molded or cut, decorated or plain, but always spiced. Fringe tidbit? Some kitchens had signature gingerbread symbols. One castle pressed theirs into the shape of wild boars. Another used the family's coat of arms. One eccentric noblewoman even had hers made into miniature models of her favorite dog. The dog, for the record, hated them. And historians still argue whether gingerbread recipes were passed down formally or kept as guarded kitchen secrets. Some cooks scribbled their recipes into religious texts, right between psalms and tax records, while others refused to write anything down, handing knowledge only to trusted apprentices. One girl offers you a tile. It's still warm. You bite into the corner and taste the spice first, then the sweetness, then a hint of something savory. Maybe mustard seed? You raise your eyebrow. She winks. Kitchen mistake, she says. Tastes better, though. You slip inside the kitchen with them. It's a blur of heat and motion. Cooks shout across the room. Pastry is being rolled and sliced. A huge copper pot bubbles with something brown and glossy. One boy is churning butter with one hand while flipping almond cakes with the other. It's glorious. In the corner, someone is making sugar paste. Not marzipan, this is thinner, stretchier. Used for decorations, edible flowers, miniature birds. One girl sculpts a tiny castle, dusts it with sugar, and places it gently on a biscuit. They'll say the queen ate it, she mutters. She never eats anything. A serving boy walks past with a tray of something golden and delicate. You ask. He replies, crusted honey plums. For the bishop. Says it helps his sermons. Someone else is lining trays with candied fennel seeds, coated in layer after layer of boiled sugar until they sparkle like tiny pearls. You sneak one. It snaps between your teeth and leaves behind a licorice sweet trail. Near the oven, a woman grates hard cheese into tiny molds. "Cheese biscuits," she says. "For the guards. Keeps 'em happy." You try one. Salty, crisp, and so full of butter, it melts before your second chew. A boy opens a cabinet and shows you a tin of royal powder. Crushed cinnamon bark, aniseed, dried ginger, and nutmeg. "For spicing the cakes," he says reverently. "Costs more than my cousin's wedding." Then come the whispers. One cook leans in and murmurs about the last banquet. How the sweetbread was underdone. How the queen's niece spat out her marzipan rose and blamed the steward. How 3 kitchen girls were blamed, and 2 were reassigned to latrine duty. Gossip is the yeast of this kitchen. It makes everything rise. Every batch of almond tart comes with a story. Every drop of sugar hides a scandal. The kitchen knows everything. You hear that a visiting noble eats only sweets molded into religious icons. Another insists his pies be filled with holy spice, harvested by monks. One demands his fig pudding be shaped like a fish. Because reasons. You pass a tray of sugar-glazed wafers and ask if they're for dessert. A girl snorts. Number for war. They bribe the Baron's page with them so he doesn't spill wine down anyone important. Genius. Someone hands you a slice of layered honey cake. Dense, rich, speckled with ground nuts and sharp with clove. You chew slowly, savoring every note of drama baked into its folds. The door swings open suddenly, and the head cook barks an order about timing the baked apples, or else someone's getting flogged with a wooden spoon. The staff jumps to action. The kitchen becomes a symphony of movement again. You slip out before anyone notices, a piece of sugar parchment in your mouth and crumbs on your sleeve. Behind you, the kitchen hums with secrets and steam. Out here, under the moonlight, you reflect. The nobility may have eaten the sweets, but it was the kitchen, hot, hidden, and slightly rebellious, that made them magical. And sometimes, lace them with a little extra revenge. You leave the gossip-drenched kitchen behind, stepping back into the flickering torchlight of a town winding down, but not asleep. Not quite. Because while the nobles feast and the servants ice gingerbread under candlelight, there's still another crew working deep into the night. Welcome to the underbelly of the medieval food game. The festival cheats, the ration scammers, and the rat fatteners. You're back near the market, but it's ghostly now. Stalls are closed, shutters drawn. But you hear it, a clatter, a whisper, a muttered curse. Someone's still working, someone's still cooking. You round the corner and spot them. Vendors with no permits, hawking snacks made from what most people would politely call reclaimed ingredients. Crusts from feast tables, trimmings from pies, the heel of a loaf still soft in the center if you're lucky. The first stall is lit by a single stub of tallow. A man crouches behind it, rolling old bits of barley bread into small rounds and brushing them with watered-down honey. "Cake bits," he says. "Half price. Full taste." You try one. It's spongy, stale, but the honey masks the sin. Mainstream fact. Nothing went to waste in a medieval kitchen. Leftover scraps were reused, resold, or repurposed into new dishes. In fact, there were whole street economies built on edible secondhand goods. Bread crusts, meat drippings, boiled bones, even cheese rinds. Fringe tidbit? Some vendors went further. There are records of meat pies made with stale bird flesh soaked in vinegar and ale for a day to soften it, then mixed with dried fruit and spices to hide the texture. Rumors persist that some even used rat meat. Not diseased street rats, of course, fattened ones. Kept in cages, fed with care. Historians still argue whether rat meat was common fare or just urban legend. In some regions, it's documented as a famine fallback. In others, it's whispered as something those other villages do. Either way, if it was in a pie, you probably didn't ask. You pass a boy offering crumb cakes. a mixture of stale bread, dried herbs, and mashed beans, fried into patties and stacked like cookies. You take one. It's chewy, salty, somehow both dry and wet. You nod. He grins like he's just robbed a castle. Further on, a woman is boiling down what looks like fruit course into thick, dark jelly. Festival jam, she says, slathering it onto a wafer-thin cracker made from crushed oats and lard. You try a bite. It's intense, like plum, vinegar, and secrets. At a side cart, you find something labeled Merchant's Miracle. Slices of cold porridge pressed into bricks, coated in fried onion and served with garlic oil. It's a texture you weren't prepared for, but it's hearty, hot, and strangely addictive. A man behind a crate mutters about bluff cakes, puffed pastries made from leftover flour paste, filled with mashed turnips and whatever fruit peel could be scrounged. He sells them for a farthing each. No one's died this week, he says. Reassuring. You buy two. The real trick, though, the scam that has you impressed, is the fake spice table. A woman displays a beautiful array of sugared dates, dusted almonds, and what look like saffron buns. But look closer. The dates are dried parsnips dyed with wine. The almonds, peas, rolled in syrup and shaped with crushed shell. The saffron, marigold petals dried and ground. You try one of each. You honestly can't tell the difference. You're furious. You're in awe. A drunk staggers by chewing what he insists is festival meat. You see the seller smirk. It's a mushroom tart, with lots and lots of pepper. Further down, someone sells Cheats wine cake. Not made from wine at all, but grapeskin mash, sugar water, and day-old rye. It's soft, slightly fizzy, and tastes like a story you'd lie about at a feast. At one table, two old women are picking through discarded pie shells, layering them with stewed onions and vinegar syrup, and selling them as night pies. You buy one. It's dense, crunchy, and a little bit glorious. The most surprising thing of all, it works. All of it. The leftovers, the scams, the illusion. In a world with no refrigeration, no preservatives, and too many mouths to feed, reinvention wasn't just thrifty, it was genius. Even the rats, you learn, have a role. One vendor waves you over and lifts the lid of a basket. Inside, fat little rodents, clean, well-fed, blinking up at you like confused customers. Roasted rat skewers, he says proudly. Only sold to pilgrims. You blink, he adds, taste like duck. If you close your eyes. You pass, you think. Somewhere near the back alley of the main square, a girl's roasting what looks like dough balls. Mash cakes, she says. Bread ends, old apples, touch of fat. You eat one. It's sweet, a little burnt, a little perfect. Mainstream street food wasn't about abundance. It was about survival, storytelling, and sleight of hand. A sugar crust here, a dash of spice there. A perfectly cut cube that hides a day-old base. Illusion was everything. You leave the market clutching a cone of fried mysteries from a man who simply shrugs when asked what's in them. You chew slowly. Pepper, plum, possibly leek. You're okay with not knowing. Because the truth is this. Medieval food culture wasn't about perfect recipes. It was about bold lies, bigger flavors, and getting through the night full enough to forget the rats. The moon hangs high now, silver and solemn, casting long shadows through the twisted alleyways. You've eaten your way through markets and monasteries, survived sugar lies and tavern truths, and now it's quiet. The town exhales. The laughter's gone. The last meat pie's been sold. But there's one more story waiting. You find yourself near the edge of the Gallows field, a grim little slope just beyond the town gate. The air is colder here, the ground harder, the silence louder. And yet, you hear something strange. Chewing. A small fire burns nearby, casting flickering light onto the face of a man sitting cross-legged in the dirt. His hands are shackled, his ankles too. You blink. He smiles. Come for a last bite. he asks, and gestures to the cloth bundle on his lap. I save the good stuff. You sit. This is a condemned man, sentenced to hang at dawn, but tonight he's eating like a king. Well, a very specific kind of king. A snack king. He peels back the cloth to reveal sticky honey cakes, thick with almonds and fruit. A wedge of sharp cheese, a flask of sweet beer, even a slice of roasted pear with cinnamon glaze. You stare. They let me choose, he says. Last meal, I asked for the treats I stole. He chuckles. Thought it poetic. Mainstream fact. In some medieval regions, condemned criminals were offered a final meal, especially for public executions. It wasn't always generous, but if they had connections, money, or charm, they might get a feast. Sometimes, oddly enough, it was provided by local taverns. Fringe tidbit? There are records of last meals including sweet beer, honey-glazed fritters, or marzipan cakes, especially if the crime had involved stealing from noble larders. One thief in Ghent requested only candied hazelnuts. Another asked for eel pie and a song. And historians still argue whether these meals were genuine mercy, public spectacle, or a twisted reminder of what the condemned were losing. Some believe the practice was part religious, part psychological, eating as a final sacrament, a farewell, or a mockery. The man beside you munches a sugar roll thoughtfully. Stole these from the bishop's pantry, he says. Didn't even eat one. Just sold them to some drunk knight. Thought I was clever. You nod. He offers you a piece. You hesitate. He smiles. What, you think I poisoned him? You bite. The roll is perfect. Warm, dense, honeyed. The kind of sweetness that makes your eyes close for a second longer than necessary. He tells stories as he eats. How he used to resell pastries to hungry kids. How he bribed guards with candied plums. How he once made a fortune faking almond biscuits using crushed beans and goose fat. People eat with their eyes, he says. You just have to feed their imagination. You ask if he regrets it. He shrugs. I regret not eating more. The fire crackles. You split a small pear tart, soft and dusted with nutmeg. That one I stole myself, he says. From a wedding table. Was supposed to be for a baron. Guess it still was, in a way. You both chew slowly. The sky starts to lighten, just a thread of silver along the horizon. He notices, but doesn't flinch. I'll go full, he says. That's what matters. He offers you the last bite. You take it. Warm, sweet, a little bit bitter. The way all good stories should end. And then the guards come, heavy boots and solemn faces. He stands. No chains rattle. He walks like a man who's already let go. You stay behind, watching the embers fade. Around you, the scent of sugar, fire, and goodbye lingers in the grass. You have eaten everything. Fritters, lies, stolen crusts, blessings, blisters, cheeses carved with secrets, ale sopped into onions, sugar with just enough sin to taste holy. And you realize, medieval junk food wasn't just food. It was rebellion. It was love. It was hunger in lace, indulgence in shadows, survival dusted with powdered sugar. It was people reaching for joy, even when joy cost everything. And now your story is full. The town is quiet now, truly quiet. Not just empty, but resting, like a loaf fresh from the oven, steaming gently in the dark. The last torch has been snuffed. The last bun, stolen. The last pot scraped clean. Everyone, even the rats, has gone to bed. You walk through the silence slowly, your feet soft on the stone, the air cool on your cheeks. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls too early, confused by the moon. Or maybe he's dreaming too. You pass the empty market, the still warm hearths, the flickering candle left behind in the monastery window. The smells linger, faint hints of sugar, smoke, clove, and quiet. You breathe it all in. You think about the kitchen girls giggling into gingerbread, the street kids selling stolen cheese rolls for a penny, the monk who fried fritters on holy days. the condemned thief who chose sweetness over bitterness for his last memory. You think about how food is never just food. It's memory, it's protest, it's comfort, it's hope. And you realize you weren't just wandering a medieval town tonight. You were walking through a world built on crumbs and dreams. So you close your eyes. Let the firelight fade. Let the sugar settle on your tongue. And drift gently now into sleep. Full, safe, sweet.